When I train as a coach, I work with a company called Energy Diamond, and really, really powerful content and delivery in terms of their coaching and profiling solutions. And one of the things I was drawn to really early on there was about this idea of being logical and intuitive, and that preference, and then thinking about, well, if I have a preference, which I do, for being intuitive, fine, what's my priority? Or the priority is probably a better way to say it, because actually sometimes using the wrong tool for the wrong job doesn't serve you that well. And that's always sat with me for a long time. And you can do other things, you know, you've got dichotomies, Myers-Briggs, head and heart stuff. There's other versions of this, but I think it's a pretty good way just to, dare I say, generalize in terms of how you might approach something. And I've had a few more layers kind of put on recently. And I'm thinking, well, do you deal with problems or possibility? So often the logical is the rational, I can fix that, I'll work with a problem. And the intuitive side is a little bit more possibility focused. So it's perhaps asking or saying the same thing in different ways, or it's certainly another layer to what we have. So let's have logical problem solving, intuitive, which works at looking at the possibilities. And they're just different frames of how you present something. Then the other two ways I would look at it is about being linear or non-linear. So I think both being logical, problem focused can be quite linear in the approach. Step 1, 2, 3, for example. The other thing I've noticed is sometimes you have a cycle. Cycles are still linear, even though you get back to where you started. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or is it 1 to 4 and you're done? I don't know. So that's a bit more of a side point. So the idea being, are you approaching something as a preference or priority? Is that a logical approach, which is problem focused and linear in its structure? And I think that's valid. The thing is, you have to have the other preference and priority. You have to have a bit of both, whether that's in you or your team or at your disposal, but try and be what you need to be for that situation. And now we're looking at something that's non-linear. So if you're intuitive, you know, I've just looked up to the clouds, there you go. It's about possibilities and it's about being non-linear. Now the reason I mention this, I saw a piece of work and when it just didn't resonate with me particularly. Bits did, bits didn't. And I won't sort of cite the work because I think it's evolving. But I came away from that thinking, wow, that's really logical. I really don't get why we have to go to that level of detail. Which is fine, because that's not my preference. But what I also noticed was I was resisting it. And I talked about resistance, and resistance doesn't often lead to great performance. It wasn't so much that logical approach. In fact, that it was also linear, and it was also problem focused. And it didn't allow for also, or somewhere in the mix, having intuition, because you can't really evidence that. I think the person is gut feel, hunches, you can't always evidence that. And also I wanted to jump around going, well, you've given me the 1 to 7, maybe the conversation will start at 7. I'll do all 7, but not in that order maybe. Or actually we won't do 1 to 3, just not relevant. Because that linear idea and searching for possibility. So for me it was an approach that was too one-dimensional. It was logical, problem, linear. What I needed also was intuition, possibility, and non-linear. Something to think about, thinking about your own approach. You've probably got the idea of logic and intuition down, and then those two descriptions can just help you a bit more, but ultimately it always comes back. There's not one better than the other, but what does work well in complex, important situations is a bit of both, whether that comes from you, the team, 2 people, whatever it might be, or different phases in a project that's very linear, logical at the start, but more intuitive at the end, or whichever way around it might be. You've got to use a bit of both.